Welcome back. This is the podcast Truth and Illusion with your host, Christian Fanli and Katie Curiosa. Welcome to episode number 3. In this episode, in our live show, we talked about intimacy and metamorphosis. And we talked about that in the context of my early childhood experience of becoming an orphan and living with 8+ families before I was 15. We talk about how one can continuously adapt without getting too attached or feeling that their value is based on how much they look like the family that they're in. So we talk about metamorphosis and coming to terms with intimacy. We're going to kick us off with a meditation. What we'll do is we'll just get into our meditation postures. And we can take a few deep breaths. As we breathe in, we can observe any tightness. And as we exhale, we can release.
Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
So maybe we can just try that on. So maybe try to imagine what it would be like to be leading a life in which you experience it as yourself being like water. As different situations show up, like water. Maybe also just bring to mind when you've been less like water, maybe resistant to something that was changing in your life, in your situation. And maybe you're holding on to something in the past. And what would it be like to release? And be right in this moment. available for what it's asking of you. All right, so welcome back. You can take a few breaths, center yourself. All right, so with that, take it away, Katie.
Well, Christian, I had an icebreaker question that I'd like to ask you. I think people fail to realize how amusing and amused you can be. So before we dive into some big and, enormous topics, I would like to know what the last ridiculous thing that made you laugh out loud might be. One of the last things that comes to mind.
Like a ridiculous thing. I think the first thing is, I think like so much is funny. So I feel like I laugh at pretty much everything. I feel like that's a relation that I have with you as well. That the absurdity of waking up every morning and what it feels like to be me. But if I think of a specific event, I was really warm this weekend, and I haven't seen my legs in so long. So because I've been wearing pants all the time, and I hadn't really seen them, so I actually took off my pants to just be cooler. And I was walking around my room, and I was like, it's so weird, look at these legs. Just like these weird legs. And I was just having an interesting relationship with my legs for the rest of the day.
Okay, you ask a fun question, you get a fun answer. Thank you, Christian. Christian and I laugh. Most of our conversations, I'd say, are 30 to 50% laughing, where I'm not sure if anyone else would find that appropriate, but we'll try to keep that ratio lower for these public conversations. We heard some Bruce Lee quotes just now, and they're pretty fascinating. And I love that he talked about how water takes on the shape of wherever it's placed. Mm-hmm. But I think with the little bit I know about your history, your water not only in being able to be poured into every vessel, but your vapor and steam and rain and icebergs, you've really taken that shape shifting to a whole new level. So I think we're talking about intimacy and metamorphosis today, and I wonder if you could talk us through a little bit about your metamorphosis and how that set your stage to see impermanence and be more intimate with yourself.
Yeah, I definitely think it was nice to find those Bruce Lee quotes, because he himself, just tracking with him, he created his own kind of martial arts, which was supposed to be the mix of all martial arts. Like, you couldn't tell what it was when there was such a dichotomy between all of these different, or such duality and such tribalism amongst, I'm really doing Chinese kung fu, or I'm doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, all these different styles. And he's considered a synthesizer of that, because I think he realized, and I think it reminds me a little bit of definitely like a smaller version. His is a much more magnificent and higher level of like just pure achievement and mastery, but it does remind me of my childhood, and I think he originally started learning learning traditionally, and then eventually seeing that actually these things have more in common. They're not actually separated like the way they seem to be separated, which we do all the time. So getting into my childhood, growing up from 0 to the short version is from 0 to like 18. I guess it's still going. I've lived in 8, I think 8, like that I would count. We could count some others. 8 different families from, I guess you would call them, very different cultural backgrounds, from a traditionally what one might label a white family, a African American family, a Irish British family, Indian from India family, Mexican American first generation family, a Filipino and Chinese family, and so on and so on. And most recently, I consider my parents now, who are from China, live in China, and are Chinese, or would be considered Chinese. So that's kind of the 50,000 foot level.
Right, and it's not just the I guess biological background that makes these families different. There's a lot of socioeconomic variety too. And what was the longest stint that you can remember? I don't think, like 0 to 3. You probably can't remember much about wherever you were then, or can you?
No, I think from like I was probably went into an orphanage around like 1 or 2. I don't know, but yeah. So I think I can't recall really well the first few house orphanages. I have one in mind, but after that, yeah, very different. The families were also different socioeconomically. I lived in a family that had that we went and smuggled in monkeys in from Nevada to bring to like this giant house in the country of the Central California in Sanger, and kids were in every single program you could think of, and wearing all the new clothing, all the way to being with a family that's on food stamps and living really like off the government's payments, and no one working in the family, and being extremely poor, having to collect cans and bottles to like pay for stuff, and I even had to get food stamps as soon as I was eligible to contribute to the family. So definitely a wide range of socioeconomic and lots of other stuff. Yeah,
just how you behave in the home, and what how to treat the grown-ups, and how you're expected to live, who you end up sleeping with. I'm sure you had to do everything from having your own palatial suite to having share a bed with 3 other people. I'm sure you've seen it all. But what I have to also flag here is that with every time you mention luxury being one of the components of your childhood, however briefly, your example is always a monkey. It's like a Rolls Royce, we ate caviar on toast every morning, brought to us by G, the butler. You're like, we were so rich, you guys. We smuggled in. That can be a crazy family that has no money at all can have a monkey.
That's
smuggled
true,
away with a monkey. I don't know what they're feeding it. If we had a monkey that only lived off of doing ground up diamonds, now that sounds like a
yes, that's true.
Always like. Just so you understand, we're under the same roof as monkeys. That to me is
Yeah, no, that's totally right. I think a better description was they were definitely millionaires, financially, multimillionaires, and had a really good family business that was really big over California, and worked in agriculture, landscaping, and things like that. That probably explains it better. And I mean, lots of I think the programs also explain it better. I was put in what do you call it? The girls were doing being sent all over the country to do cheerleading and gymnastics, and I was doing wrestling and gymnastics, and I was doing fencing for a while. So it was just that sort of kind of definitely.
Now, were all of these places, I also want to know about the geography.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand I don't even know if you understood at the time how you're being placed and when you were transferred from home to home. Were these all roughly like, oh, I'm still in California, I might be in Southern California now, but I kind of have an identity here? Or were you all over the U.S.? Were you all over the globe?
Yeah, I guess it's a time range. So definitely in the early ages. So I was born in Texas. I don't know anything about Texas. I've never seen Texas. I don't have a memory of Texas, I should say. But so mostly California. I eventually went to go live in England. That's a long story. And then I've also lived in China, but that's more recent. And then mostly in California. It wasn't, I think it was like central, south, a little bit of north, but mostly central, south California.
That's incredible. I mean, as somebody who grew up in the same town, I went to the same school for 8 years in the same uniform. 7 years ago, they let us wear a cardigan instead of a pullover, and that was freedom. this was the same people, had to go to church there on Sunday, could not have been more rote and routine. So understand, of course there's a little bit of grass is always greener, you've got to live all these different lives and experience all of this, but that makes light of what I think most people would have an incredibly troubled and difficult experience with this. And I want to know, since you didn't know anything different, or maybe just your inborn personality or some sort of inner strength that you stumbled on early on to cope, I'm not sure how you handled all these transitions, if some of them were harder than others, if you were more attached to some experiences more than others. And you were just a child, and I want to know, you seem to have channeled all of these experiences into not seeing divisions, which I think is so admirable. But I wonder how many stumbling blocks you had along the way. This impermanence was such a feature in your life compared to, suburbanites like me.
Right. Yeah, or at least I always think it appears that way. I think over time I've started to think that we're all facing it, I think, because we think of this as kind of special. I think it seems like it's more impermanent, but I don't know. I think I've been coming up with this thing called the second question. So which means you can explain a situation, and it's what you just did right now, which was great, which is first you explain a situation, then you have to ask the question, what was your experience of it? Because if you explain the situation, you might go, I know what the experience was. But then I lived with 11 children at once, and I can tell you their experiences were extremely varied. And some of them, I had this foster brother named Sean who used to pick up black widows and run around, and he was not connected to his family. And the guy was just in his own world, and I just felt like he's always happy. People literally pick on him because he's always happy. He's the enemy.
I would pick on him for picking up the black widows and chasing all of it.
Yeah, he does that too. Yeah. But
he's happy, but also having a homicidal streak, Christian.
Yeah, he might. So he was fascinating, and then there were just other kids who were extremely in pain and wanting to get back to their families, and devastating. Much more, I think, what you would expect, but it's actually, having lived amongst 11 children from 4 years old, age range of 4 years old to 17 years old, to see the huge range of just experiences of how they took it definitely made me consider that you cannot know what's going on unless you're really that close. And even then, I don't know. I don't know where all those children are now, and how they're doing, and what was the effect on that. But I could definitely feel at the time that it just was so individual, even though it looks so easy to say, oh, that must have been really impermanent. But for me, I think my experience, just thinking about my experience, generally, I don't remember the transitions being too difficult. I do remember one transition where I was running out of, I was trying to run to another house, actually. So a lot of times, the reason I have so many homes is not because I moved around a lot officially. It's actually because families would just go, oh, we want this kid. I'd be going to school and I'd be wearing like the worst of clothing ever, and like not showered for like weeks, in this one family, and like just not really cared for nourishing wise and like food wise. And some people would just like, oh, come and stay at our house, and then I'd start staying with them, and I'd be like 2 years, 3 years into staying with them. And that's the same of living with that richer family that I talked about. It happened like that, but the problem was there was this legal thing of like the family that was from England that was one of the first families that I kind of stumbled into informally, tried to adopt me, and the family that I was with tried to fight it, actually. And so that became a big point of contention. So those transitions, that wasn't a bad transition. The only transition that I can really remember being tough was I was trying to run away to the Fernandez family, who I'd grown really close to, I had been living with them. You know, it's the monkey family, as I call it. I had been living with them for at least a year already, and I went back to the original, like, legally held foster place and foster home that I was in, the Armstrong family, and they wanted me to stay, and somehow we got into an argument, and I argued with the father, and then I was like, I'm leaving. I'm going to leave here. And then he was like, you're not going to leave here. And so we got into this high-speed chase where he was chasing me, and I was on this bike. It was like really dark outside. So it was in the country, by the way. So I lived in the country. I had chickens, pigs, and sheep. So I was like the shepherd. So the big thing was I was fully responsible for the farm. So I was the one that would wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, go out, water all of the trees, all the produce trees, go pick all the hens' eggs and for breakfast, and go and feed all the pigs and chickens and sheep. And we had one horse at once, and then we had three because two came because someone wanted to borrow our place, so I would also feed them in the morning. So that I really kind of started to take care of the whole place. I would go out there just by myself. And
how old were you?
Probably like 8 or 9, 8 to 11 maybe. But yeah, I was pretty hardworking, I think, when I was quite young. I actually really liked it. So if I think of my first moments of like getting meditative moments, was waking up very early, being completely by myself, at least human wise, and just being absolutely, I can still recall the feeling of going out there in the morning and just taking a water bucket all the way. It would take me a long time. We lived on 3 acres of land, which is not a small amount of land.
And when you're 8, your legs aren't very long, right. So it took you an extra long time to get to them.
Yeah, but I found it so
you should have some stilts. At least they could have done some pretty stilts. Yeah. That's incredible. Well, I also wonder if it was a good experience for you because there was a sense of purpose. I mean, being adrift, these animals were relying on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they were probably friends to you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, some of them.
Not that one rooster. He was a a-hole.
Yeah, actually the roosters were pretty bad. So
I'm telling you can't trust them. You got one thing on the mind. Christian, so wait, I'm a little confused. I don't want to get stuck in the minutia, but you're working the farm.
Right.
Monkey family sees you and say, we have to rescue Horse Boy.
Right.
You go with them, and then you come back, and they're like, no, you must work at the farm. I'm just confused. Where are the social workers? Are they not checking in and seeing if you still live there? Did you get away from the foster home?
Right, so because we were in the country and not the city, I think when I was in the city, I know the foster care check-ins were quite constant. I mean, I had multiple times where they would just show up out of nowhere and like have spot checks. But once we went to the country, no.
The check-ins, not the chickens.
Not the chickens, right? The check-ins.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but
Wow.
once we, the check-ins, yeah. And I could get into detail, but I want to make sure to touch on the, we'd check in, and I mean, it was a script. I mean, almost every official foster family I was in, there was like a script. They're like, everyone line up before you go to this social service. Here's what you're going to tell them. Here's what you're not going to tell them. It was a complete system of like, it was interesting.
Wow. Yeah. I have two questions. I'm not sure if one of them is taking us back too far, but I'm wondering, there's other 11 children that you were with that you're trying to describe and their different reactions. How do you think they would describe you if they were looking back, you at that time? And then I want to move on to more about how this all led to your metamorphosis or your fluidity with things that usually most people think are binary, and you follow certain descriptions and roles, and we are this, we aren't that.
Right.
I feel like,
yeah, that's a good question. I've never really thought about that. I think definitely like very, for some of them, very like determined, like controlling, very sure about what needs to be done, very righteous. I think I was very moral, like I know what was right and wrong. Like I felt like I really had a view of like what is right and what is wrong. And I think I had a lot of righteousness, and kind of a loner. So I think, I really liked those mornings. And if there was like a lot of children that were joining, it would be okay, but I would really enjoy just being out with the horses, picking up their manure by myself. I quite like that.
right.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're hardwired for self-intimacy, I'd say. Like, I think you became what you could count on. So I wonder what you have to say about complete intimacy and your path to it, or if you're still on that path to get to it.
Yeah, I think we're all still on the path. I think it kind of folds in with the water, right? Like, so I think what I was trying to do in a lot of those families was trying to become them. And I don't think there's anything right or wrong about it, but as I started to become them, I felt like I would become so good at it that I was better than them at it. In some ways, it's like, I think I'm more, like I said, I think I've said this before, but I would take the Scantron, when you're taking a test at school. Whatever race I was the race of the family. Whatever like background or whatever those type of demographic questions about family. So family income stuff, just anything that was like that would be changing. And so I never had this kind of idea that I was this set of things that were just there. And because it was like every 2 years, it was like it totally changed. Now, I do think some kids did have that and still moved around a lot because especially I think, and I think it's still empty. I think even kids that don't go through this can have the same outcome, which is a lot of kids would be like, well, my real dad is this, my real mom is this, and this, so I'm this. And this foster home that I am in is like an extra. It's not my real culture. It's not my real thing. That's not me. That's not how real family is. Real family is over there. And I never had that feeling. I just always, I don't think I had a good model for what family was, but I don't think I had a model for too long. And so anyways, going through each of these families and adopting, what I would get to is a point to see that their whole structure in some way had a lot of holes in it, a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of like when I was in the like the British family was only half British or whatever, or even with the Mexican family, there would be like, well, there's the real Mexicans, and then there's the not so real Mexicans, and it's like, what? I thought this was fixed. I thought this was like a thing. It's like, oh, those guys, oh, they're not part of the group, and just seeing all of these kind of like contradict, and then seeing that, oh, family is always going to be there for you, and it's like, did you get good grades? And like having like, oh, okay, so this is conditioned. All these families with different conditions, totally different. Sometimes totally different. Like I remember one family never looked at my grades, and thank goodness that I actually cared about school, because I just felt like if I didn't, like, but I went to another family. It's like, let me see your grades. Your whole relationship to your parents was, 60% based on how you did in school. And so I started to see, all these things are kind of conditioned. If you don't do these things, you might still get love, but it's going to be pretty bad for you for a while. And then there was abuse. Like I lived in the richer family, and just the experience of the highest order of things. Like the family I lived with was the most competitive family I've ever lived with in my life, and it was great. And I wasn't that competitive at the time, but I became much more competitive. It was just like, who's got better grades? Who's got better clothes? Who's going to a better school? And it was just like cutthroat. And then there was a contradiction. It's like, now these kids are getting blamed for being called spoiled, and like, why do you think you should get the Gucci, or why do you think you should get this like very expensive outfit or whatever? And it was just like, wait, wasn't this the whole thing? Was like, in order to get this, you need to do good. So just seeing those contradictions, and seeing how impermanent love was for a lot of people, not just foster families, but going to these families and saying, oh, it's conditional, here it comes, now they're very happy to be with you, and then you embarrass them at school and you're not on the top 10 list, and all of a sudden they're really angry. And you're seeing how unpredictable it is, and I having been shocked into different families with different values, I kept seeing, oh, this is just all like this big kind of, I didn't know what acceptance was. I never experienced a family that was really what I would call, like, some things that I've experienced now, and maybe for myself, is that radical acceptance of, okay, who are you going to be? This is totally your path. I have no clue where you're going to be. I have a few tips for you. I never really experienced that. I experienced more like, I'm your father. And I kind of know what my or mother is like. You need to do this and you need to do that. And I think I've always had the feeling of wanting to be. I did have a feeling within me of wanting to do my own thing, and like. So, anyways, the intimacy part comes from when you kind of stop listening so much to the external, and you start listening to what's happening with you. And I think the external changed so much for me that I kind of got used to it and said, okay, I'm not going to be able to rest in the external. It's like, yeah, it's not possible.
Yeah, it sounds like the families where you were, they wanted you to be a reflection of them. So they were externalizing their worth on your performance, whether that be on the farm or in school or whatever you were doing. So, yeah, that's definitely not intimacy. That's you were like a showpiece in a strange way. It's amazing that you were able to create some continuity for yourself. And is resistance really the enemy in these situations? Like, it sounds like if you had been determined to stay in one place, or determined for one family to give you that worth, that, the grades became the only thing you did because you thought that's the only way you could get love.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to put a disclaimer too on, like, I actually think now looking back that, like, all families are trying as hard as possible, so I'm being a bit hard on them. But it did make me realize that, getting older, how difficult it is to not want this fixed sort of world and think your values are the right values. How easy it is to slip into, oh, I know what the good things are in the world. I know what the bad things, and here's my kid. It's so hard not to project onto them. And I just want to say that is not a attribute of me going to bad families. I think it's just an attribute of how difficult it is to really step back and be more selfless, and it's scary, for a lot of people. Like, I'm gonna just let you be.
Yeah. Well, also, I feel like family is the example we're using here because we're talking about your life story and your path. But I do think people externalize so much their sports team,
right,
their religion. It's amazing how that's the worth. And if your team won, I mean, men's testosterone goes up or down depending if their team won. And I'm like, what in the world? Like, there's so much value placed on something that you cannot even control.
Right.
But you want to be the winner, and it's amazing how much people scientifically identify with other things, whether it be their children or some other, my political party won this election. Like, now everything will be fixed. Like, how well has that done for us and anybody?
I think that's good too. Yeah. And your question about, what was your question again earlier?
That's one thing I cannot answer, Christian. Yeah. I'm like water. I'm in a different. I'm now
the other children. Yeah. So I think when I think about the other children, when I try to think about it, and it's really not comparable, but if I did a comparison, I think it's the ones who were that experienced the most suffering is those that did not give up to the now, who didn't. And what I mean by that is they were like, no, I have a real family. This is fake. This needs to be over as soon as possible. I shouldn't be here. And literally I watched not just the same children. They would swap out. So those 11 children were probably about, I don't know, maybe 15 children or something, because there were swap outs, right? Where some children left, some children went back. But the worst that I've seen is when it becomes a war. So I actually saw like a war zone where like it's either you wanted to get adopted so you can be official, bloodline almost. So it's this kind of competition for like, if I could be an Armstrong, if I could just have the last name, I could just have the last name, that would do it. Or I can go back to my real family and be there and I'll be normal. Because you having to remember that we have to go to school, we have mothers, parents come to school, grandparents come to school. We're all at school, 10 of the 11 of us, and we all see each other, and we're not and some people are saying, I'm related to you. Some people are like, nope, I'm not related to you, right? This whole thing, like 2 weeks they're your brother, then they just decide you did something wrong, and it's like, no, you're not, you're no longer my brother. So you have all of these, and this happens even in blood families where it's like some degree of brotherliness or siblingness, mom and dad, teenagerhood. It happens all the time. I think this is just a amplified version. But yeah, I think a lot of the children that I really think about a lot, and I had a really open heart towards, was the ones who really could not accept that maybe you do have to give up the idea that your parents who are in jail, who have been in jail since you've been 2, may not be the best bet for you. But of course, like, who's going to give them that wisdom, right? Like, everyone else is telling them you're not in the right place, right? And so all this societal pressure. And so I felt like the people who were able to, I think, suffer less, and this is my projection, is the ones who really just accepted, like, I don't know. Let's see. And there's the I don't know, like, that's freaking me out. Whoa, you know, ambiguity and like the scariness of that. And there's the I don't know of like, yeah, maybe I'll be here for a year, maybe I'll be here for, I don't know. Like, not exactly indifferent, but in some way accepting that right now we're here, we're on 3 acres of land, and we got a lot of stuff to do to keep ourselves occupied.
And the horses are 3 miles away from me right now, and I got to put on my mud boots, get the slop out there to the pigs. You know, we've all been there, Christian, in one way or another, or maybe. So how do you come to self-esteem in this? It seems like it'd be so defeating, even if you were open and saying, look, I don't know. It seems to be so easy to tip toward nihilism or negativity and being like, the F cares. Obviously, no. And like to have a real chip on your shoulder, but somehow you came to, I'm not sure if you'd call it self-esteem or identity. It almost seems like like you don't really rely on an identity. So how did you find your way there? Was this a gradual thing over your childhood, or did this come upon maturity when you're out of that system?
Yeah, I think it's still in the works. I think the way I think about it now is like I was in the business of what Ram Dass calls becoming somebody. Right? You're like, I'm going to be this person with these attributes, and that's of value. And as soon as I get there, things will be secure. And I did that over and over. And then you end up having to defend your territory, because once I became, you know, part of the Chinese and Filipino family, it's like, I do these things. This is who I am, you know, and then it doesn't even matter who you are. You're going to be attacked, especially like high school and these places, right? You're going to be attacked for your territory, and the harder that you pinch down, that's, I think, the one way to do it is to really try to inflate yourself, right? And go the narcissistic way of like, I am this, I'm very proud to be this, and you know, you get this sort of like, we are better than this, and I think you get that kind of inflated tribalism, or you get something that's more like finding solace in these kind of outwardly groups of like, oh yeah, these are my people, you know, and I don't think that that's bad. I actually think that's on the way, right? On the way to kind of letting go of that I was constantly defending my territory, and especially when there was 11 children, you're constantly not knowing who's going to like totally call you out, right? Like, you're saying those are your brothers and those are your sisters? All right, it's already kind of sketchy. And then your brothers and sisters are willing to like, I am no longer that person's brother or sister. So I think it's constantly trying to defend those identities and make them of value and convince other people that they're of value. That I think there's been a transfer in my life that I would call kind of, you might call it, like Ram Dass calls it, becoming nobody. And actually that's the best. To me, like, that's the you're letting go. So in order to be like water, I think in order to be fluid, you need to not have a fixed set of things that you are, right? Or else you're going to hold on to those things. You can have them, but if you're holding on to them in that way that's grasping, you end up having to, it's very hard to change, right? It's almost like you've got nails in your feet, and so you want to move, and it's going to be very difficult to do that.
Well, speaking of nails in your feet, having gone to like endless years of Catholic school, I think it's 16 years of Catholic school and 2 of Episcopalian. It's like to hear become nothing. I can hear what you're saying, but I can imagine some people listening find that concept quite jarring. Like there's an instant resistance. It's like we're told we're all unique, right. We're all beautiful, like we're all going to go to heaven. Like we it's a very, you are you, right. And you play a role, and you stay loyal. Also, it's like staying very loyal and playing right. by certain rules. Again, it's not trying to just slam Catholics. You can slam a lot of religions for this, but it's so weird because I think that I've come to terms with it. But there's something when you say become nothing, where I'm like, okay, that's a nerve where I'm like, that's something to look at, because there's a little bit of a freak out. I'm sure Ram Dass would appreciate me saying freak out. So he'd be like, hey girl, you freak out on movie. So you mentioned that, like, okay, so for us people who are not going to go through experiences of fosterhood like you have, you mentioned that the children who seemed the most successful at this could embrace the now. Like you were able to stay in the now and flexible to, this could all end tomorrow or next week. The way people see me in this house could change tomorrow. I could be here for another year, but they won't love me as I thought they would. I could be no longer their brother on the playground. Like you have this acceptance to a degree. I'm sure it was still hard of not getting attached. But like, how would you recommend to the rest of us to put that eternal now in our minds and help when we're finding that we're feeling othered or that we're clinging too hard to our definitions of ourselves?
Yeah. I think it'll be helpful to qualify like becoming nobody, which is, it's still completely uniquely you. You're unique. You don't even have to try. It's just impossible not to be. So that's a relief. You don't have to go and try to like make it up. You're literally already there.
Because there's something about the terminology, and I realize I'm being very bad.
No, it's good.
There's something about being blank.
Right.
Like so getting rid of your opinions, getting rid of, I get where getting rid of baggage is a great thing, or getting rid of being so attached to something that when it changes, your whole identity is called into question. I'm married, and I'm married to this person, and we're happy. Like, what are you saying you're leaving me? Like, I can imagine that just being like, but this is all I define myself by.
Right.
I can imagine that just being like so much more difficult than if you were like, things change, coming to terms with having your full identity. But there's something about that nothingness where I'm like, it sounds awfully shut down or just erased.
And I like your translation of it here that we can use. It's like being completely like an open vessel for what's going to come. And so maybe you could say that that's an attribute if that's helpful, is to say that basically you're ready to receive what's available. And if you're not, it's kind of like space, like when you're extremely busy and then someone comes along, they're like, hey, they want to talk to you kind of lightly, and you're like, no, like there's no space for you here. I'm sorry. And then think about it when you don't feel busy and you feel like there is a open space where you can, this person wants to talk. I haven't filled myself up so completely that I don't have room for this person. And so maybe openness is better to be thinking about that, is that as you continue to do meditation practice, I think it's a really good practice of increasing your capacity for that openness, to be able to be available for other people's trip and all sorts of different trips, right? So maybe that's a better description of it.
Yeah, that reminds me, in our pre-talk, I brought up the fact that Meryl Marco is a fantastic writer. She actually used to be head writer for Late Night with David Letterman, and they dated for a long time. This is back in the 80s. So she wrote a bunch of kind of fake self-help books that are actually incredibly helpful and very funny, and some of them are out of print. One of them is called How to Be Happy Like Me, and one of them was called The Guide to Love, which was on the cover dressed up as a hunter with a giant gun and these big hunting dogs, which is very funny. And one of her great articles inside this book, I don't remember which book it was about the blind date with destiny. I think the first line is, when you're single, every day is your blind date with destiny. And I've always loved the idea of that. I think the more open you are, the more you realize that every experience is an invitation to a party, really, surprise party. And so I get where, if that's nothingness, that sounds pretty good.
Right. Yeah. No, I really like the terminology of the blind date with destiny, and I think that comes back to what we're talking about. That's every moment. So we talked about also like people we feel the need to go to new places, to go on holiday, right, and like switch things up. We usually have to do something dramatic to see the change, because we get settled and defined and filled up, and we kind of understand the way things work, and that gives us a sense of security. But it comes at the cost of like, well, now in order to get out of this box, I need to like go and fly to a totally different looking place. But the fact is, all of us have this ability to tap into the eternal now, right? To our blind date with destiny, as you put it, right? And so in this very moment, there is no moment like it. Even the next moment isn't even though it feels similar, and that's because of our biological processes, it's hardly comparable. There's a guy named Homeless Kodo who says like, he's so funny. He says something like, it's something about it's something about passing gas, and it's saying like, you're not even passing gas is not comparable to the next guys. And I think what he's really hitting on is actually the freshness. Like, I remember I was really sick when I was little for 3 weeks, and I felt like I was going to die. I wasn't going to die, but I felt like I was going to die. And for like 2 weeks after that, everything was fresh. Same place. I just felt like everything was sparkling, fresh, new. And I felt like I was really confronting the now. Now that I think about it, when I look back on it. And we all have these like glimpses of like, wow, the flowers and everything is just lighting up for me. And this practice is really about, well, that's supposedly how a person who wakes up is experiencing the world all the time, right?
I'm laughing because I keep thinking of this They Might Be Giants song, that basically the lyrics are, you're older than you've ever been, and now you're even older, and now you're even older, and now you're even older. You're older than you've ever been, and now you're getting older, and now you're older still. Time marches on, and time still marches on. That's the whole song. And they do this live, and like they put this dramatic spotlight on him, and it's very funny. But it's like this existential moment that is just, it's so funny to me. Like, it's like we said, the dark stuff is also the funniest stuff. So on that note, I'd love to open this up to any questions in the chat. I don't want to take all of Christian's time. We have maybe another 10 minutes or so. If anything comes into mind, I can definitely keep going, but I'm happy to read your question to him so he can free his mind to answer you. Let's see. One thing that we have not touched upon in this conversation yet is positive psychology. I'd like to know a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it a little, which, again, because positive psychology can be used in so many ways, there's not really a real definition of it that's fitting. But one of the strategies being used when people were in those foster homes was kind of a pumping themselves up with kind of, and I did it too. So instead of, you hear all these negative thoughts about you, maybe people are saying bad things, and you think, oh, well, I know what to do. I just need to tell myself these positive things to kind of offset these. And it becomes this kind of huge mind game, I think, most of the time. In my experience, I should say, where you develop this inner critic and this inner kind of like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a narcissist, but inner like positive guru, right? You develop this, like, I think this is the classic devil on your shoulder, angel on your shoulder situation, right? That's the dialogue that's happening. And a lot of times people's devil part is talking a lot more during times of stress, but a lot of positive psychology is kind of some of positive psychology is trying to blend that in. That what you should see is kind of say, I'm proud of this, I really feel good about this, or I really I have these good qualities. And that can work, I think, temporarily. But when we talk about the becoming nobody again, or openness, you can totally trust in your ability to change, your ability to shift into the moment, and much more than I think you can trust being able to talk yourself out of it and it not coming back to haunt you. And so part of this, which is another talk, I think we need to talk about it next time, which is just the narrative. We think that the continuing the narrative inside of our heads and really engaging with that is a way to help us suffer less. And to some extent, it definitely is. But what I've seen in my own experience is actually there's an alternative to that allows you to just let go of positive or negative or even neutral thoughts and see that it's a narrative and be able to not be identified with this whole kind of narrative game, which we'll talk about at another session.
Yeah, dropping the narrative. That would be nice, because I've got a whole chorus of opinions going at all times, Christian. So I look forward to learning more about that.
Yeah.
Still, questions can be accepted. If you're near a keyboard, you can pop those in there.
You know, with the number of people we have, I wonder if we wanted to we could do breakouts today.
But anyone who doesn't get you in their breakout will feel sad.
Or I wouldn't be in any of them. Yeah.
I mean, I guess we could. I haven't done one of those with you before.
Yeah. We did it the first time and it was fine. I think it's just how many people. Oh, it's actually still going. I mean, it's enough to talk about it. Yeah. I actually think we can do, if we don't want to do questions, we can just do the meditation again on the way out and just call it a episode.
Yeah. I do have to say I really liked the water, thinking about it more and more, how water is itself, but you would never mistake ice for rain, for the ocean, for a puddle. Like, they seem like such different things, but that doesn't mean it's not water. So I think that acceptance of yourself and realizing sometimes you'll be going with the flow and sometimes you'll be frigid and just noticing the change, rather than like trying to talk yourself out of those changes, just noticing it and being kind to yourself sounds like a good plan to me, Christian.
I like that.
That's what I'm taking away.
That's I think that's beautifully said. I think the part that I see coming out there for me is that it's also okay to have identities, right? It's not, the identities are not the problem. It's the kind of holding on to them and thinking that they're going to save you or that they're going to solve all your problems. So yeah, you could wear multiple. Bruce Lee in some other quotes said, like, you shouldn't see me as a superstar. I'm an actor. And he wasn't talking about like professionally acting. He was saying the highest value of martial arts is this being exactly what you need to be for whatever role that is there. So seeing yourself as an actor rather than, no, I'm really this person that has to do this and has to play this role, and if I don't, it's really going to be bad.
I wonder, like, I like to give it as the one who acts. Like, acting on your identity is not the problem. It's staying open to what that might mean rather than rigid around some definition you were given or holding on to for worth. Like, that's it sounds like you're talking about yourself, but it's actually externalizing again, because you're putting yourself up to the tradition or the home that you grew up in. Or like you have certain things rigid in your mind that equals worth, and that's, even though it's in your own mind, that is still externalizing, having to fill that role, whereas being the one who acts and stays open would be being the actor. Become Bruce Lee. That is our advice for next week. Actually, do we have an assignment of any kind for next, something to keep in mind until our next chat?
I think we're still staying with the intimacy theme, and we didn't get too into the cycle of impermanence. I think we can do that next time, and we can talk about that. I still think it's how can we become completely intimate with ourselves, and my brief description of that is just, I mean, the like very maybe an extreme description of that or definition of that is every single thought, every single sensation that arises, you're there for it. Maybe not when it starts, but before it passes, you're there. So I would say that this is a very high bar. So at the just everyday level, it's just taking moments to realize that you're to be aware of what's going on. What's going on with this mind, this body? What's it feeling like? Just taking a moment in your day, touching into that. And then maybe you notice like you haven't done it for like 3 hours. You haven't checked in. And that too is an insight. You're like, wow, so for 3 hours, I was probably completely identified, right, with, oh yeah, I was just going about, and that's not bad. It's great that your awareness notices. And then I think as you keep practicing, you'll notice that over time it becomes more, it spreads, right? It's like an ink dot or blot that spreads slowly to where your awareness is like, that you are looking at thoughts in every moment. And then the one thing to notice is what happens when you're not identified with the thoughts. What happens when the sensation comes through and you can just observe it? Not during meditation, because that's a great safe place, but actually in the real life, in real world, where you're like dealing with, you're in a meeting. See if you can be intimate and then let these, what thoughts are going to come up? What kind of narratives are going to be really curious about? Oh, how do I feel about this? The person next to me just said this. I guess probably not next to you, but on Zoom. And just being aware of that, and that self-intimacy becomes a sort of self-compassion that I think is really powerful.
I love that. I'm into it. Sounds like a much richer experience. If we can manage that, I think we're doing well for ourselves. I hope everyone's had a fun time listening to the conversation and had some food for thought for next time. And just remember, more truth, less illusion.
Thank you all.